Dear colleagues, we continue our working day, and the next topic, social, political and economic aspects of situation in the separate areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Our speaker, Vadim Skibitsky, representative of Chief Intelligence Department of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Good afternoon to everyone. So today the Chief Intelligence Department have prepared the briefing materials concerning some aspects of situation in the separate areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions on social, political and economic aspects. According to our estimates, the situation in temporarily occupied territories is very tense, and it has been worsening in all spheres of life, and we sympathize with the citizens who reside at the occupied territories, and we understand that those standards of life and humanitarian situation which is now in the occupied territories, it prevents full-fledged life of our citizens in the east of our country. First of all, the occupational power is not capable to provide for the needs of the civilians, and tense security situation also influences the situation in economic and social spheres, and the management of the occupied territories in Lugansk, the so-called Lugansk and DPR, Lugansk and Donetsk public republics, they do not answer why, in the context when there are agreements on ceasefire, the economic and humanitarian situation remain to proceed deteriorating. The militants and the affirmation and Russian occupational troops intensify military actions and hostilities in order to distract the attention of the citizens from their standards of life. Despite this situation, the occupational power started preparations to the local elections in the so-called DPR and LPR. The level of trust among civilians to occupational power has been decreasing, but this power influences them by appointing their trustees who will execute all instructions of the DPR and LPR leaders. The administrative resources used to increase the number of voters at the so-called local elections there. In particular, Platnitsky and Zakharchenko, they issued orders that they will dismiss persons who are employed at state-owned enterprises, so they are ordered to vote and they are ordered to join some parties. And the matter of Ukrainian political forces exclusion and ban on Ukrainian mass media activities on the occupied territories are being considered, and also the ban on return of IDPs to their homes on the occupied territory. The situation is very complex in the industrial sector and SMEs. According to the Ministry of Defense, the situation is characterized by negative factors which result the impoverishment of the population. For example, my Kiev metallurgical plant now operates at 10% of its capacity, and the enterprises switch from 5 days of working week to 7 days of working. For example, in mine Shahivska, Lutuhinska, they suppose to dismiss more than 1,500 people from their jobs in order to racketeer the fiscal offices of DPR and LPR are instructed to collect taxes at the level of 10 to 30% of output of those SMEs. According to the Chief Intelligence Department, the deficit of budget of DPR consisted in 2015 85%, and the events to increase there are actions taken to increase taxes on the coal industry enterprises. The other negative factor which we observe at the territories of DPR and the LPR is professionals outflow. This concerns professors and lecturers of higher educational institutions and those professionals who worked at the enterprises which were from which equipment was delivered to the Russian Federation. For example, one Lugansk plant was the jobs there were cut from 7,000 to 2,000, and we see that the Russian Federation is not interested in delivery of food products to DPR and LPR, and from bringing any products from LPR and DPR territories to the Russian Federation. The profitability decreases and unemployment grows in the territories of DPR and LPR. Criminal activities of DPR and the LPR leaders cause decrease of small and medium businesses number. The salaries are not paid, and or if they are paid, only 25% of salaries are paid. As of February 2016, in LPR, the debts were at the level of 105 million US dollars, so the debts increased. And the social welfare is limited. For example, the vets who took part in Afghanistan war, and the cost of food has been growing. The food basket at the LPR DPR territories is 2-3 times higher than in the territory of Ukraine in general. Against this background, the situation with crime worsens. The armed attacks on civilians are commonplace. the settlements which are not controlled by TPR and LPR, they are racketeered with the use of small arms. The gangsters deprive people of their private property, such as cars and valuable things. The most problematic settlements are Donetsk, Yasanovata, Shakhtarsk, Kharkiv. The situation with crime is critical in Gorlivka. Russian occupants were forced to use law enforcement officers of the Russian Federation in order to stabilize the situation and to prevent exacerbation of the situation with crime. But crime combating goes hand to hand with the search for those persons who disagree with the policy of DPR and LPR leaders, especially in the eve of the so-called local elections. They try to find persons who have pro-Ukrainian opinions. The Donetsk and Luhansk leaders issued a resolution that they will strengthen control over local citizens and control, and also they will strengthen internet resources control. The internet providers are obliged by Zakharchenko, for example, and such services as Gmail and Yahoo are banned. These search engines are banned in those republics. And in the military sphere and preparation to the elections in those republics, these are proved by the visits of the Russian Federation leaders. In February this year, Surkov, the advisor to the president, visited those republics. The main goal was that the Kremlin needed to instruct the leaders of DPI and LPI about their next steps, and the leaders' visits to the occupied territories also result in intensification of hostilities. In those periods, the number of shellings increase and the reconnaissance activities also become more intensive, and the first and second corps of the Russian Federation troops also conduct more active hostilities. And as concern restoration of and renovation of active warfare, this was discussed at the last visit of Russian leaders such as Mr. Surkov. Mr. Surkov discussed the issue of engaging reconnaissance of the Russian Federation and intelligence service of Russian Federation in sabotage activities on the territory of Ukraine. So security, social and economic context in the temporary occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast deteriorate. The leaders of those republics stand up for their interests, and they try to insist on the conditions which are instructed to them by the Russian Federation leaders. Sergei Kutnyakov, the manager of Heavenly Hundred Service, press service. Do you know the information about the number of Russian military men in the territories, occupied territories in Donetsk and Luhansk region, and the number of troops and military men and the borders next to the borders in the south and in the east? And your opinion of reasonability of civil military administrations established in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, taking into consideration the situation which you have talked about. On the first question, the answer is the Chief Intelligence Department has proved information about the number of first and second corps of the Russian Federation. As concerned directly the military men of the armed forces, regular units of the Russian Federations, regularly based in our country. They are 7,000 persons. As concerns strengthening the manpower of the Russian Federation at the eastern and southern borders of Ukraine, you know that the trainings of southern horizon of the Russian Federation were conducted near the borders of our country regularly. In Rostov region, in the ground fields, training fields, there are 16,000 persons, but Russia can strengthen its manpower anytime. According to the results of random immediate inspections, the analysis of trainings demonstrates that within 3 days the Russian Federation is capable to increase the number of its troops at our borders. As concerns Crimea, the Russian Federation has 22.5 thousand military men in Crimea. This is a significant number of troops. They are both land-based and sea-based, and they have aircrafts. Besides that, the opportunity to deploy also nuclear missiles and multiple launch rocket systems of high range. So they try to have the same military base as the Soviet Union had. We have information about the conscripts to LPR and DPR armies, and in Crimea about local citizens who were conscripted and they can proceed with their terrorist activity. Starting with Crimea, according to Russian laws, on our occupied territory, the conscription started to the armed forces of Russian Federation. Those bodies who are responsible for conscription, they are in operation now in Crimea. So the Russian Federation behave there as they behave in their home. They believe Crimea is a part of the Russian Federation, and concerned DPR and LPR. 3 times they tried to carry out waves of conscription to the 1st and 2nd Army Corps. The second was at the beginning of February. So far, the civilians willing to be conscripted to those LPR and DPR armies, they are scarce. Social and economic situation is very complicated there. This is the only reason why some persons go as volunteers to those armies of LPR and DPR. Officially, the first corps is for Donetsk and the second is for Luhansk. They total 34,000 persons. 70% of them are citizens, mercenaries, and active regular servicemen from the Russian Federation. Thank you very much.